born to a man with great power, whom then accomplished an amazing feat, and then cast you aside. You'd have to accomplish something pretty great to A, fill those shoes, and B, surpass that man. That is exactly what Alexander of Macedonia did, which is why, in my opinion, he is also known as, and known as to many, as Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was born in the Pella region of Macedonia on July 20th, 356 BC. He was born to King Philip II and Queen Olympia. Alexander almost never saw his father because his father was far too busy with military campaigns and internal affairs. And even when he wasn't doing that, he still didn't make time for his son, because in his opinion, it was king first, family second, which is a terrible mindset. And it was because of that mindset that Alexander began to resent his father, and that resentment soon fueled into hatred. His father knew that Alexander, being the first and only born son that he had, was eventually going to become king. And so he had hired tutors to teach him how to be a king. Those tutors had famous names that I think that we all know: Aristotle and Leonidas. These two great tutors taught Alexander everything he needed to know: the social status of most kingdoms, political intrigue, and military display, of course, martial arts, and swordsmanship. They taught him everything he ever needed to know how to be both a warrior and a king. It was after this that, as just a mere teen, he helped his father conquer the Thracian tribes and all the Greek states except one, Sparta, which was one of the most fiercest states ever, and he knew better than to try and conquer Sparta. But the joint work between father and son would come to a bitter end rather quickly, because King Philip II remarried. He'd gotten tired of Olympia and then cast her aside and denounced Alexander to be his son, forcing them to hide. And it wasn't until 336 BC that King Philip II was then later killed at a party by a Macedonian noble. With the death of his father, the now 19-year-old Alexander was set on becoming the new king of Macedonia and was determined to do it by any means necessary. After hearing that Alexander wanted to become king, his father's military completely backed him up every step of the way. And how couldn't they? I mean, he did help them and fight alongside them in the battles of Cherona. With the armies of his father by his side, Alexander quickly became king. And his first decree as king was to kill all the other heirs in his father's bloodline, making him the sole survivor and the sole child of King Philip II. Now, because he would become king, the Corinthian League, which was what his father named the Greek set of states that had been allianced under his rule, they weren't just going to automatically just bow down to this new king. In fact, many of the Greek states had already been talking about separating again. But Alexander decided not to even give them time to do just that. He knew that he had to redo what he had helped his father already do, which was reclaim the Greek states. But the first was Thessaly. He had conquered Thessaly, surprisingly enough, without force. He used diplomacy. Thanks to Aristotle and Leonidas, he had learned how to obtain a silver tongue, and it was thanks to that silver tongue that he had conquered Thessaly without even a single soldier. Next was Thermopylae. Now, Thermopylae he did have to conquer with force. However, they had isolated themselves off, so that was rather easy. Next was the Thracian tribes again. That one was just around easier than the first time, because this time Alexander was familiar with how the Thracians fought and with their mindset. State by state, Alexander would conquer and conquer. The final state, though, was Thebes. Wasting no time, because Alexander had decided that he had spent enough time as it was conquering these states, he and his 30,000 soldiers marched on Thebes. And they arrived so quickly that Thebes didn't even have time to get ready. They were still getting over the fact that they had just separated. And Alexander, not long after his men got there, he gave them the rest of the day to calm down and refresh and get ready. And after they had a good meal and were all prepped up, they attacked on the same day. I don't think he even had to fight them. I mean, they didn't even put up a fight. This was known as the Massacre of Thebes. And Alexander used this as a reminder to the Greek states of what happens when they try and leave, and as a warning to Sparta, saying, I won't mess with you, but if you mess with me, this is what's going to happen. And Sparta understood that and left him well enough alone. Now, after he had reconquered the Greek states and reclaimed the Corinthian League, Alexander then set out to branch his horizon even farther and conquer other kingdoms. Egypt was the easiest thanks to his mother, whom personally was so devoted to her son that she set out and personally assassinated the current pharaoh Cleopatra's child, which drove Cleopatra to insanity and suicide. So conquering Egypt was without a doubt the easiest one that he had ever done. Then next was Babylon, or nowadays modern Iraq and Iran. Then the entire southeastern coast of Asia. But his conquering didn't even stop there. After that, he even went to India. But out of all of them, the most difficult one for him to conquer was Persia, because King Darius III, whom was the king at the time, was relentless. He launched counterattack after counterattack on Alexander the Great, and he had very few ways of countering it. He was whittling down his 33,000 men little by little, and Alexander knew this, but he also knew that Darius III and his men had to refresh themselves somehow, in some place, and he figured out that place was along a giant river. And so he beat Darius III to that river, and when his men arrived, Darius's men, they were already waiting for him, and they attacked and massacred his soldiers. After that, they practically just marched down Persia's front gates, and they practically just let him in. Darius was helpless and handed over the crown to Alexander. But it was also there that Alexander met the love of his life, Rosanna. He thought that she was the most beautiful woman in the world, and he married her instantly. And she, of course, was okay with this, because he made her queen of the world. For at this time, Alexander had obtained the titles King of Babylon, Asia, and the four quarters of what they thought were the world. He was a ruler of it all at the time. However, he wouldn't be able to rule it all himself, because while he was in Persia, he had contracted an illness. At the time, he thought it was just a fever, and so did they. But when he went to India and conquered Lord Paru, he learned there that it was far more than just some simple fever. At the time, they didn't have a word for this disease, but we do now. It's malaria. We have no cure for it even nowadays, so you can imagine what it was like back then. For once in his life, Alexander was the one to feel helpless. He died June 13th, 323 BC, 1 week before his birthday, 3 days before his first son's birth. And that is the story of a man who was born with everything, grew up with nothing, and then took everything back by himself, which is why he is known as Alexander the Great.